Allen Company, 47 years young and a proud sponsor, wishes OOIDA all the best as you celebrate 50 years.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
A bill has been introduced into the U.S. Senate to tackle an issue of high importance to many truckers, and it's called the CARS Act. I'll find out what the bill is and what it would do from Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. For most Americans, paying taxes is a once-a-year affair in mid-April, made simpler by changes in tax laws over the past few years. For those who are self-employed, it's not all that simple, and it never really has been. I'll talk with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service. And finally, voters in Maine will decide soon whether to become the second state to implement an automotive right-to-repair law. Meanwhile, voters in 2 Minnesota locales will decide whether to approve tax increases to benefit roads. Scott Thompson covers both with our state legislative expert, Keith Goebel. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today, diesel prices back on the rise. The Energy Information Administration's weekly report shows the average for a gallon of diesel last week at $4.54, up more than 10 cents from the week before. That reverses a trend of decreases of late. Leading up to last week, EIA had reported declines in 3 of the past 4 weeks. But the price you pay at the pump may depend largely on the region you're doing it in. Prices went up in 5 of the 10 regions EIA tracks and down in the other 5. The Midwest reported the steepest increase of 25 cents. California had the biggest drop at more than 10 cents. The latest ProMiles.com report shows prices on the rise as well. Tuesday morning's average came in at $4.44 a gallon, up nearly 2 cents compared to a week ago. ProMiles has prices rising in just 3 regions, though, with declines in 7. Detention time devalues a truck driver's time and hinders highway safety. That's a message from the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association in recent comments to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. In August, FMCSA published a notice in the Federal Register that asked the public to comment on a proposed study into the detention time issue. OOIDA obliged and had plenty to say. The association citing a 2018 report from the USDOT's Office of the Inspector General that found that a 15-minute increase in the time a truck spent at a facility increased the average expected crash rate by 6.2%. The report also concluded that detention time costs truck drivers up to $1.3 billion each year. OOIDA said that makes it clear that detention time is both a safety and financial concern for small business truckers and professional drivers as a whole. But solving the problem or alleviating it, the association added, requires defining it more clearly. OOIDA wrote that the trucking industry has traditionally defined detention as any time spent waiting to load or unload in excess of 2 hours, meaning if a driver spends 5 hours waiting to load at a dock, the first 2 hours would be considered free, while the remaining 3 would be classified as detention. OOIDA said this completely discounts the value of a driver's time. Detention time is referred to as the time truck drivers sit at shippers or receivers waiting to be loaded or unloaded. Truckers often are not compensated for any of that time, as most drivers are paid by the mile. The FMCSA study may lead to changes. About 80 motor carriers and 2,500 commercial motor vehicle drivers are expected to provide data for the study. OOIDA encouraged the agency to make sure small carriers and owner-operators are included. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is giving the public more time to comment on a proposed overhaul of the carrier safety rating system. The extension is due to an overall lack of feedback so far. The comment period was supposed to end next Monday, October 30th, but as of the end of last week, just 12 comments had been posted. FMCSA extended the comment period Monday, saying it's in the public's best interest. The new deadline is November 29th. FMCSA would like people to weigh in on the Safety Fitness Determination Program. Specifically, the agency wants comments on issues such as should FMCSA retain the current 3-tiered rating system of satisfactory, unsatisfactory, and conditional, and why or why not. FMCSA is also seeking feedback on the Safety Fitness Determination regulations, including the process and impacts, and the available data and costs for regulatory alternatives reasonably likely to be considered as part of this rulemaking. All answers and input, keep in mind, may be taken into account as FMCSA looks to make changes to the current system. We've officially entered peak trucking season, but we're off to a slow start. That's according to the Cass Freight Index, which reports a 1.7 increase in the number of available shipments in September compared to the month before. That's substantially lower, however, compared to the year before, down 6.3%, in fact. Shippers were also spending less, according to Cass, a 0.2% drop in September compared to August. But when compared to September of last year, that rate is down 25%, which translates to the big drop in freight rates you're all seeing out there for yourselves. Meanwhile, there was a slight decrease in load volume last week. Landline Now's Ashley Blackford has the details.
According to DAT, there is a 1.3% decrease in load volume to just over 1.1 million loads last week. Robert Rouse says this is where DAT expects the freight market to be at this time of year.
We should see a traditional seasonal bump in freight in the second or third week of November as Christmas and early holiday goods get shipped out. So we should be right around this over the next couple of weeks. When we look at the number of trucks on the DAT load board, they increased by about 1.6%, up to 412,000 trucks. One of the interesting data points is that we saw all three equipment types increase between 1% to 2% last week. This is kind of what we would expect as we are seeing less demand in the freight market. We'd continue to see some of these trucks coming back on the market. When we look at the overall strength of the spot market last week, we saw the load-to-truck ratios remain pretty flat for vans and reefers. When we look specifically at last week's reefer load-to-truck ratio, load-to-post remained relatively flat for the second week and was about 55% lower than last year, while carrier equipment posts were also flat and slightly below the average weekly load-post volume for about 2023. And that resulted in last week's reefer load-to-truck ratio remaining primarily flat at about 2.78. But in historical context, that's pretty close to what we saw back in 2019 as well.
Rouse adds that national benchmark broker-to-carrier spot rates without fuel stayed mostly flat, with only reefers seeing a penny increase from last week. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Ashley. At least 7 people were killed Monday in a pileup involving at least 158 vehicles in Louisiana. It happened on Interstate 55 in the southeastern portion of the state. Authorities say there were crashes in the northbound and southbound lanes, with some of those crashes igniting fires. They say road conditions were poor at the time. The National Weather Service says dense fog and smoke combined to form something called super fog, which was heavily impacting portions of the interstate leading up to the pileup. The Louisiana State Police said residents should expect I-55 to remain closed for the foreseeable future as authorities work to clean up the scene. Although the death toll currently sits at 7, officials worry it could rise as they clear the area around a hazmat truck that was involved in the crash. At least 24 people were injured in the pileup as well. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. You can write a letter to your elected officials in Congress or look up contact information for lawmakers who represent you on the state and federal level by using the website fightingfortruckers.com. Again, that website, fightingfortruckers.com. If you'd like to join OOIDA, you can do it at a discount. Just call the membership department during business hours at 816-229-5791. You can join the association or renew your membership for 2 years for $50, a $40 discount. Next, I'll discuss an effort to blunt a federal requirement for electric vehicles with Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. I'll cover quarterly estimated tax payments with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service. And Scott Thompson discusses a right-to-repair ballot issue in Maine with state expert Keith Goebel. We'll be back in a moment. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. You need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now, welcome back. A new bill has been introduced into Congress to tackle an issue of high importance to many truckers, and it's called the CARS Act. Here to explain what the bill is and what it would do is Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. Bryce, how are you doing?
Mark, I'm good. How about yourself?
Very well. Let's kind of start with the basics. What is the CARS Act?
CARS Act is an effort by lawmakers to basically rein in the EPA and some of the efforts that we've seen to basically require electric vehicles and phase out the internal combustion engine. So I'm sure we'll get into the details here, but it's as simple as that. It's both on the light and medium duty side, but it also includes trucks and heavy duty vehicles. So while some of the bill text and the title might imply it's cars, things like that, it's all of the EPA's authority as it's regulating any type of vehicle.
So who's introducing this and in which chamber of Congress?
Yeah. And so the bill that was just introduced within the last week is from Senators Crapo from Idaho and Senator Crapo and Senator Ricketts from Nebraska. Those are two Republicans. And this is actually companion legislation to a bill that was introduced in the House earlier this year. And that was introduced by Congressman Wahlberg from Michigan. Also, we've been talking with Congressman Clyde from Georgia about this issue as well. So this is something that's been introduced in both the House and Senate, but it's in the news again because the companion legislation was just introduced.
So I know that this is just very new in the Senate, but I'm wondering what level of support has it drawn so far there?
Yes, so I was a little, I guess surprised isn't the right word, but I was encouraged to see how much support there was for this legislation in the Senate. There were over 20 senators who have endorsed this legislation. So clearly they recognize that this is an issue that's on the mind of many Americans. You know, we hear this all the time from our members, from truckers, and from people more generally that, sure, we're fine with electric vehicles and fine with these things being developed. But the real problem comes in is when you're trying to mandate these things. So it's not too surprising to see as much support as there is.
Senator Crapo issued a statement with the bill's introduction in the Senate. Can you kind of convey some of what he said?
Yeah, it's similar to what we've been saying all along, but this is important to push back on the Biden administration as they've, in a lot of ways, tried to pick winners and losers. And, he points out that Americans should have access to affordable and, importantly, reliable vehicles. That's something that we've touted for a long time, too, is we want to see that this technology works. We want to see that there's the infrastructure for it. But forcing this technology on people before it's ready is very problematic. So it's good to hear that he's hitting on those same notes that we've been trying to broadcast all along.
Now, this is happening, as you mentioned, in reaction to an EPA proposal, and part of that proposal is a requirement at some point to go over to electric vehicles. I'm wondering if you can go into a little bit more detail on what that EPA proposal says.
Yeah, and that's it's always difficult because there's so many different EPA proposals that are out there, and I just kind of want to set the table a little bit because I know we talk about it so much. You have greenhouse gas emission standards, and that has to do with what we're talking about today when you're talking about the push to move to electric vehicles. There's other things out there that have to do with particulate matter, NOx emissions, everything else. So it's really challenging and frustrating to try and keep track of all this. But what this legislation is really focusing on is the EPA's greenhouse gas emission standards for heavy-duty vehicles, Phase 3, which would go into effect for model years 2027 to 2032. So basically what this would do is it would force the transition to electric vehicles and phasing out combustion engines. So that's where the real concern is. As much as the Biden administration wants to talk about the infrastructure that they're building out for this technology and how much investment is being put in this technology, there's just so many unanswered questions, including so many unanswered questions and uncertainty, even with everything that the EPA has put out there. And again, the other frustration with this is when you combine it with all these other regulations that they're putting forward, it's not clear how these are all going to work together. How are you going to, comply with all these other regulations on other emission standards while at the same time trying to move to EVs? It just seems like it's a nightmare waiting to happen.
You talked a little bit about OIDA's position on this bill, and obviously the association supports it. Mm-hmm. But what is the reason that the association has chosen to support this effort?
Yeah, I mean, we're supporting this effort because it's important for us to step up for our members and try and push back any way that we can on the EPA. And I think another reason that we're making sure to speak up on this is because it's clear this effort isn't stopping. You have the EPA moving forward with this regulation, moving forward with other regulations. You have California moving forward with their own set of EV regulations for heavy-duty trucks. So it's really important to try and find any way to advance our priorities and try and fight back on this. To draw kind of another analogy or parallel, when you look at the speed limiter mandate that we're fighting right now, we're working multiple avenues on that. We're working standalone legislation. We're working, funding restrictions as part of the funding bills that Congress is passing. We're also still working through the regulatory process. So I think that's one of the really important things that OOIDA does is try and just find any possible avenue to fight for what's important for our members.
You mentioned the similar plan in California with electric vehicles, and I just want to clarify for folks that are probably wondering about this, the CARS Act would not affect that, would it, the California plan?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And so that's that's why this gets so confusing. And you're right. This doesn't deal with the specific issue at hand with California. With that said, there's some other legislation and there's other efforts out there to try and stop California that we're a part of, but this legislation isn't touching on that.
So what stage of the legislative process are both the House and Senate versions of this bill at right now?
Yes, so the Senate bill here was just introduced, so they're trying to build support, get more co-sponsors, get industry support, things like that. Over in the House, though, the bill has moved forward. The bill was introduced back in July, but the House Energy and Commerce Committee considered it and advanced it right at the end of August, beginning of September. So from what we've heard from lawmakers there, we do expect that it may be taken up here at some point before the end of the year by the House. That was what we had heard before everything that's going on with the leadership turmoil in the House. But we do know that's still a priority. And seemingly this is something that makes sense for the Republican majority to move forward with. This is something that has broad support from Republicans and something where they should be able to stand united.
With 20 co-sponsors in the Senate, as you mentioned, that's a pretty good start. I'm wondering if you can kind of rate the chances, though. I mean, we've got the House in the control of the Republicans, the Senate in the control of the Democrats. What are the chances like in each chamber for this bill? Yeah, and I should say it's mostly a Republican bill in the Senate, but Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia is one of the supporters on the legislation, so it does have bipartisan support in the Senate. With that said, it's
hard to see how this would move forward, especially when you have to overcome a 60 vote threshold in the Senate. I don't think that there's broad enough support or enough support from the Democratic side to get it there. But still, it does show that this is not one of those issues that's, a completely partisan issue. And we've seen that to be the case with some other EPA regulations and some other efforts to overturn what the EPA did. Earlier this year, there was a resolution to overturn a Biden administration EPA rule that, in fact, did get 50 votes in the Senate, and because of the specific way that was considered, that's enough to get that actually passed in the Senate. So I'm not going to say it's has any enormous chance of moving forward, but it's certainly something that the leaders on this legislation, they're going to make sure that it's on the radar of their colleagues.
Okay, Bryce, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Mark.
I've been talking with Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office about the CARS Act. A truck stop currently under construction in New Hampshire is taking measures to reduce truck idling and air pollution. Here to discuss what's happening is Landline magazine staff writer Ryan Witkowski. Well, first of all, talk to us about this truck stop that's going to be built. Where is it, and tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's the Mega X truck stop. This is located off of Route 101 in Raymond, New Hampshire, and this is billed as the largest truck stop in the state. It's going to feature a convenience store, drive-through coffee is going to be available, 18 different fuel pumps, and over 100 truck parking spaces. But the cool part about it is they're going to be electrifying 34 of those parking spaces. So 9 different plug-in power pedestals will be installed at the truck stop. It's going to electrify 34 of those spaces, and not only is it going to provide electricity for any overnight parking needs, but it will also provide cable TV. So a really cool little feature.
Now, they've gotten some money from a federal program to help with this. Talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Volkswagen Environmental Mitigation Trust Fund, which was established back in 2016, I believe, or 2017, was basically from an EPA violation on behalf of Volkswagen. It was a settlement that they came to, and each state was awarded a certain amount from that. In 2017, $31 million of that was awarded towards New Hampshire, and so they've been using some of this money to seek different ways to reduce emissions within the state. And this was one of the ideas that they had, and essentially the idea is that putting these power poles at overnight truck parking places, truckers could plug into them, not having to idle to essentially provide power to their hotel load, and they'll be able to just basically reduce emissions by having truckers have this overnight.
Talk a little bit, if you would, about the people who are going to be providing this power and kind of how that works, because I think that's, as we said before we went on the air here, one of the interesting things about this.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The Shore Power Technologies is the company that's being contracted to provide these power poles. Now, while it is an overall benefit, and I'll say that, to the environment, and it may or may not be an overall benefit when it comes to cost savings to truckers, I don't want to make this out to be like it's free power that's being provided, because the way that it works is truckers will pull up to the truck parking spaces. You'll have an opportunity to park there. You can plug in your truck, and then once you plug in, there's a phone number for you to call. You call the number, they start the meter, and that's when you're paying for the service. So while they are providing an excellent service in terms of power overnight to you, it is something that you're still going to have to pay for. Whether or not that has an overall cost savings versus burning diesel to keep your truck idling all night, hey, that's going to be something I think you're going to have to crunch the numbers on.
Landline magazine staff writer Ryan Witkowski talking about an electrification project at a truck stop being built in New Hampshire. For more on this and related topics, go to landline.media. A few quick reminders. A September harvest proclamation in Iowa now runs through November 11th, suspending certain weight requirements and permit restrictions for agricultural haulers. Vehicles are allowed to be overweight so long as they don't exceed 90,000 pounds gross weight. All highways within Iowa, aside from the interstate system, are covered. And the way users log into the FMCSA portal is changing. Access to the portal will now be done through a login.gov account. To ensure you have continued access to the FMCSA portal, you'll have to set up a login.gov account by December 1st and follow the step-by-step instructions. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Firestone tires are for more of everything. More miles for every tire dollar, and more confidence in your fleet. At Firestone, we help fleets save with dependable value. Find your local Firestone dealer today at firestonetire.com/dealer.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
When it's time to overhaul your truck engine, help protect it by insisting on a genuine Vibratech TVD crankshaft damper. Heavy duty, absolute premium quality, and they're made right here in the USA. Find a dealer at vibratechtvd.com.
For most Americans, paying taxes is a once-a-year affair in mid-April, made simpler now by changes in federal tax laws over the past few years. For those who are self-employed, it's not all that simple, and it never really has been. You're listening to Landline Now, and I'm your host, Mark Reddick. Welcome back to the program. Those who are self-employed have to pay their taxes on a quarterly basis, often estimating based on what their books are telling them or based on what they paid in the previous tax year. Add to that the need to regularly pay self-employment tax, and you're talking about a significant chunk of your income. The problem is, some people don't regard this requirement as a requirement, and that can spell trouble. To get some basic information about the topic, I talked with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service. First of all, Shasta, what are quarterly estimated tax payments?
Quarterly estimated tax payments is how the IRS requires a self-employed individual to pay in their taxes. We know that employees have the employer withholds the income tax and then sends it in themselves. The employer does. But when you're self-employed, it's your responsibility to calculate and send that tax in yourself.
So I know there's several deadlines during the year. When are these due throughout the year?
Okay, the due dates are always the same. They are April 15th, June 15th, September 15th, and January 15th. Now, if one of those dates should happen to fall on a weekend, then it's the Monday following. It's extended out.
What triggers you having to file estimated tax payments?
If you owe tax that is over 1,000, you have to make quarterly estimated tax payments. And I've talked to a lot of truckers over the years, and so many times I think that they're confused about estimated taxes. They seem to think a lot of times that this is an optional thing, but it is not. It is mandatory. And if you do not make these quarterly estimated tax payments, you will be penalized. And so I really want people to avoid this penalty, and also to avoid having to come up with a really large lump sum at tax time. That can be a business killer. If you have not made estimates throughout the year, and then come tax time and you're filing your return the following year, come April 15th of the new year, and you find out that you owe thousands of dollars that you have not set aside, then that puts you in a situation where you're going to have to go on a payment plan for the prior year. And April 15th actually happens to be the due date of the first estimate for the new year. So you can imagine sometimes a person in that situation is really getting hit with a double whammy if they don't have a full understanding of what those estimated tax payments are and why it's so important to make those payments.
So walk us through the process, Shasta, if you would. How do you file your estimated tax payments?
Well, you can pay online at the IRS website, or you can go to the IRS website and download the payment vouchers. The payment vouchers are form number 1040 ES, and you can get blank vouchers. It will show the due date of that estimated tax payment. You'll get 4 of them, and then you will fill in how much you're sending in and then mail those in. They have to be postmarked by the due date. I would say, if you're mailing, always send with some kind of delivery confirmation. But if you want to go the simpler route and just pay online, set up an account and do that online and get that done. The hard thing comes to how much to pay. That that's where it gets tricky. If you have a tax preparer, they can help you to make that determination. But to satisfy the minimum requirement, to make it as simple as possible, to avoid a penalty, you must pay in 100% of whatever the tax was due the prior tax year, or 90% of what is due for the current tax year. So to play it safe, if you've had a full year of operation the prior year, you can just divide that into 4 estimates. A lot of times with your tax return, you'll get those vouchers. Your tax preparer will provide those. Otherwise, you've got to do that calculation on your own if you don't have someone to help you do that for you, a tax preparer to do that for you.
But you're always safe if you pay just 100% of what you would have owed the previous year.
Yes, absolutely. That is when in doubt, when no other option, you definitely want to do that.
What about the self-employment tax? First of all, what is the self-employment tax for people that aren't familiar with it?
I'm really glad you asked. When you're paying into the IRS, when you're self-employed, you are taxed, you have income tax on your earnings, and then you fall into a particular tax bracket based on how much income you have, whether that's 10%, 12%, 22%. But part of what you owe the IRS is not only income tax on your earnings, but it's what they call self-employment tax. What self-employment tax is your Social Security and Medicare taxes. Because you're self-employed, you have no employer matching the other half of that. When you're an employee getting a W-2, you pay half and the employer matches the other half and they send that in. When you're self-employed, the amount you pay is also based on your income, but you're paying the entire percentage of that, which is 15.3%. is what that self-employment tax is. That, which if you break it down, 12.4% is for Social Security, and that's paid in under your account, and then 2.9% is for Medicare. So that's a lot of money. 15.3% on your earnings on top of the income tax you're paying in can be a big number. Now, one thing that kind of soothes that is that half of whatever that amount is, you get to deduct that on your tax return. So that kind of makes it a little bit easier to swallow that big number. But a lot of people, when I talk to a tax client and they have this really big tax bill, and we talk about, well, listen, a big portion of this, 15% of this, is going to Social Security for you. And a lot of my clients weren't even aware they were even paying into Social Security. So I really would like everyone to know that, yes, you are paying into Social Security when you're self-employed. That is based on your profit, the income that you're making. You are paying 15.3%. But that does make a tax bill much larger than maybe in your head you're thinking to yourself, hey, well, I'm going to fall into the 10 to 15% tax range. That's what I'm going to set aside. And they forget to allow for the self-employment tax. So I feel that's a reason a lot of self-employed individuals, a lot of truckers are falling short when they are setting aside money for their taxes every quarter.
Well, and it's interesting you say that. If you look at that, that's 15% maybe setting aside for income taxes, 15 roughly percent for self-employment tax. You're talking almost a third of what you earn has got to be set aside just for those taxes.
Yes, and if you're like me, and you're thinking, well, okay, maybe I'll get IRS. They deserve 10%. It's never what you imagine. It's always much more. And if you're in the 15% tax bracket, like you said, and a lot of our truckers, will fall into the 22%. And if you're having a really good year, and if you fall into the 22% and then you're putting another 15 on top of that, that is a huge hit. And then don't forget if you're in a state that has state income tax. So we're looking at a lot of money. So it's so important to keep up, number one, with these estimated tax payments and pay as you go. And also be aware of really how much you should be setting aside and putting away to make these estimates.
Is this something where people should be setting aside something out of each settlement?
Yes.
Maybe every time they get paid?
I would highly recommend that. When clients call me and say, okay, what should I be setting aside, for IRS? And I always tell them, you need to be setting aside a minimum of 20 to 30%. Then the more the better, the higher the better. If you're able to hit that 30% every time, that is better. And also, I want to make clear, sometimes people get confused thinking they're going to be paying tax and setting aside that percentage on their gross. That is not the case. Your tax is calculated on your net, on your profit after all your expenses have been deducted. So I know a lot of guys will have a heart attack if I say, yeah, you need to set aside between 20 and 30%, and they automatically assume of their gross. And that's just insane. That's not doable. But no, it's your net. So just make sure that when you're calculating that you're doing it on your net, not your gross.
Okay. How would you figure up your net as you go?
Well, you want to be doing some kind of bookkeeping. If you aren't having, professional bookkeeping done, if you're doing something, whether it's manual, computer, whatever you're doing, you really want to do some kind of at least rough kind of draft of, okay, here's my gross income, here are all my expenses for the month, and here's what I have left. This is my net profit. Of that money, you've got to be setting aside the 20 to 30% of that, so that you don't have too high of a hit, and you don't end up April 15th of next year owing tens of thousands of dollars you don't have set aside.
Now, you've mentioned that there are penalties if you don't set this money aside, if you don't pay the quarterly tax. What kind of penalties are we talking?
The penalty is interest on the underpaid amount for the number of days that the payment is late. So an interest is charged at the federal rate, and the federal rate, I think currently is like 8%. So these are big numbers and they add up quickly. So these penalties are severe. So you really want to take this seriously. Quarterly estimated tax payments are absolutely mandatory, and you really want to get that money set aside. And like you mentioned earlier, at the very least, pay in 100% of what you owed last year to avoid that penalty. That is the easiest, simplest way to, keep that penalty from happening.
Okay. Well, Shasta, is there anything else on this topic that people need to be aware of?
Well, I think that just keep this in the back of your mind, that this is something important that's got to be done. It is very easy just to go on the IRS website and download these vouchers, these 1040 ES forms for yourself, or set up an account online and just go in and make those payments 4 times a year. It's so much easier to do this as you go than to get hit with a big tax, not only a big tax liability, but a big tax penalty.
Okay. Shasta, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me on the show.
I've been talking with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service about quarterly estimated tax payments. If you have questions about this or other tax matters, you can contact Shasta May by calling 1-888-407-1669, by email at smay@mbataxhelp.com, or by going to the company's website at mbataxhelp.com. Again, that phone number is 1-888-407-1669. Email address is smay@mbataxhelp.com, or you can go to the company's website at mbataxhelp.com. We'll have all that information on our website, landlinenow.com. Just click on the photo or headline in the red box and you'll find all the email addresses, website links, and phone numbers we mention on the show, plus links to related articles. Again, that's at landlinenow.com. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Welcome back to Landline Now. Time now for our state legislative update, which today takes us to Maine and Minnesota, where voters this fall will decide on a few matters that could end up affecting you in one way or another out on the road. Joining us with the details, as always, Keith Goebel of Landline Magazine. Keith, good to see you.
Scott, good to see you.
Let's begin in Maine, Keith, where voters will find question number 4. Question 4 on the ballot come November 7th, and if it passes, Maine looks like will become just the second state to implement a right to repair law. For those not familiar, what the heck does that mean, Keith?
Yeah, if you're looking to be considered a state at the beginning of a trend, maybe right to repair. Maybe that's the trend.
We're thinking of trendy states. Maine comes to front of mind too.
Yeah, and with potentially becoming the second state to implement a right to repair law, I think they're hopeful that it would go smoother than it has in Massachusetts, which I'm assuming we might get to here shortly. But yeah, I know in Maine, currently, vehicle manufacturers, they're not required to provide diagnostic and repair information. They're not required to provide that to vehicle owners or independent repair businesses. So, necessary information for maintenance and repairs, it's obviously limited to those authorized dealerships, and that's what they're trying to address in Maine, to simplify, providing information to independent repair shops, vehicle owners, including commercial vehicle owners and heavy-duty vehicle owners, access to information, tools, and software that is needed to repair and maintain their vehicles. So, yeah, question 4 would make what some folks are saying would be a huge benefit for, again, any and all vehicle owners there in the state of Maine.
Yeah, and just to make it clear, I wasn't taking a shot at our friends in Maine to say that they weren't trendy. No, but the point is that this is not a state that you typically think of with things like this. And this is, as you said, there's something that we're probably going to see more and more of, because it does give people the freedom to basically, again, repair their stuff in the way that they want it repaired.
Yeah. Gosh, what do I mean? Open access, being able to go and, as a consumer, do what you feel like is the best option for you. And there's a fair amount of time. The best option is not the most expensive option.
Yeah.
If you've got someone that you can go to or a location that you can go to that you feel good about, allowing that access to again, those independent repair shops. We talked about, and I mentioned at the very beginning, possibly this being, are they going to be establishing a trend here with this? I mean, Massachusetts, it's been, a decade plus since they approved their right to repair law, with the focus being on automotive. There are right to repair laws that exist across the country. There's not a lot, but specifically on automobiles, Massachusetts is the only one. If Maine does this, they'd be the second state to do it. Then you start to wonder, okay, is this a regional trend, or is this something that could go national? Because obviously you've got Massachusetts and possibility of Maine. Whenever states look at what has my neighbor done, or states in my region, what have they done? Maybe this is something that starts to, get a foothold in the Northeast, and perhaps some other states, even outside the region, would strongly consider doing the same thing.
Yeah, and I know we've seen the federal government weigh in on this, NHTSA in particular, with some concerns, and we've seen a push kind of on the federal level as well for this idea. But we'll see how that kind of pans out. I think we are going to see this more on the state level, as you mentioned there, and we'll see kind of how the federal government responds over time.
Yeah, and of course, the issue to this point, why it's not more common for states to have this, and what Massachusetts has had to fight, and what some concerns that have been voiced to this point in Maine is concern that having this open access resulting in potential vulnerability to hackers. And those are valid concerns, and definitely issues that need to be addressed. It definitely is something that has folks' attention. Now, you've got supporters, on the other hand, that will say that is those cybersecurity concerns way overblown, and that there is much more benefit out of approving this than, again, concerns that, for the most part, supporters are going to say just aren't legitimate, aren't valid reasons to not have this in play.
Well, the day after Election Day, November 8th, we'll find out what Maine voters feel or how they feel about this issue. Let's move to another M state, Minnesota, where a couple of the state's biggest cities will be asked on Election Day about tax increases. This is all about road funding, Keith.
Yeah, specifically, we've got the cities of St. Paul and Rochester. Hope maybe next week here, as we're leading up to Election Day, being able to cover some other notable metro areas or counties across the country that have, notable transportation issues on their ballot. But yeah, specifically out of Minnesota here, we've got for the city of Rochester, they're looking to extend their local option sales tax, which they've had in place for 40 years? I look at the date that the city of Rochester had this tax implemented, and I think about, I was around back in those days, and we're talking about 40 years ago. So anyway,
what?
I feel kind of bad now that I've come in here to talk with you, Scott, which is a rare, I'll say. But
well, I'm sorry.
But anyway, hey, this 40-year-old tax that they've had in Rochester, it was extended back in 2012. It's a half-cent tax. It covers multiple funding needs that they have there. But they're looking to extend it again. It's got a 2024 sunset date. So the idea is, they're going to, over the past decade plus, they've generated about $140 million again for local purposes, like including road reconstruction. If they are to extend it out again another 16 years, the expectation is that they're going to generate over $200 million with about a quarter of that going for roads. There's a decent amount of money, obviously, that's going for other purposes, but road reconstruction work over the lifespan of an extension would amount to about $50 million. In the city of St. Paul, they've got a penny tax that they're looking to implement. Over the course of the next 20 years, the expectation is it would raise about $1 billion, with about three-quarters of that going for improvements to streets and bridges.
Keith, you don't look a day over 39. I think you're doing okay.
I appreciate that.
So you'll look 40, I guess, in a year from now. Another big election, obviously in 2024. We'll be talking about this a lot over the coming months or so. But looking ahead to 2024, any big issues you see kind of popping up?
Well, in presidential election years, there's a lot of stuff that's going to be on the ballot, not only for, officials that are running for offices, but questions, and with that, transportation-related questions, not only statewide, but county and city. It's all over the place. Looking for trends, going back, looking 4 years ago, 2020, statewide transportation-related questions, there were 3. But if you go back to 2016, there were 9 statewide transportation-related questions. So in a given year, like for next year, I would think that there might be at least a half a dozen states, if not more, that'll be having transportation-related questions on their ballot. So definitely something that keep an eye on.
We'll keep an eye on it. Keith, we appreciate you coming by as always.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap on today's show, but we're back tomorrow with another. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome,
and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.